They were trained to kill. Starved, beaten, and taught to obey only violence. Once released, these dogs never stopped. That was the belief. That was the fear. But on one humid August night in 1847, deep in the backwoods of northern Georgia, something happened that shattered everything people thought they knew about cruelty, loyalty, and survival. Something so disturbing and so unexpected that plantation records were sealed, witnesses went silent, and an overseer disappeared as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. By sunrise, 4 enslaved people were gone. The dogs were alive, and the kennels were filled with silence. This is the story of that night. This is the story of the Hargrove Plantation. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. And tell us in the comments where you are listening from. Now let us step back in time and uncover how this nightmare began. The Hargrove Plantation sat far from any town, nearly a full day on horseback from the nearest road that mattered. 800 acres of red clay soil and dense pine forest surrounded it like a natural prison. The land felt cut off from the rest of the world, as if time itself moved slower there. At the center stood the main house. A white 2-story structure with tall columns and wide porches. From a distance it looked peaceful, even elegant. But that calm was a lie. Around it were the tobacco barns, storage sheds, and the slave quarters. Rough wooden cabins packed close together with barely enough space to breathe. Beyond the fields were thick woods where wild animals roamed freely. The air always smelled of pine resin, sweat, and damp earth. At night the forest seemed to watch the plantation, whispering through the trees. The plantation belonged to Samuel Hargrove. He was in his late 50s and had inherited the land from his father. Over the years he expanded it through careful deals and ruthless decisions. People in the county described him as quiet but dangerous in his own way. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply decided. And once he did, there was no appeal. Hargrove spent much of his time away in Savannah and Charleston, attending business meetings and social gatherings. When he was gone, control of the plantation fell into the hands of one man. Garrett Thorne. Thorne was lean and sunburned, with sharp eyes and a face that never seemed to relax. He had once been a field hand himself on another plantation, but he climbed the ladder through cruelty. He believed fear was the only tool that worked. He wore a leather whip at his side and carried a pistol in his waistband. He used both without hesitation. The enslaved people feared Thorne more than they feared Hargrove. Hargrove was distant. Thorne was present. He watched. He listened. He punished. And worst of all, his cruelty was personal. He arrived in the spring of 1845, recommended as someone who could keep order and increase production. Within weeks, everything changed. Thorne created new rules. No talking during work. No gatherings larger than 3. No movement without permission. Punishment was immediate and public. Whippings took place in the open so everyone could see what happened to those who stepped out of line. There were around 60 enslaved people on the plantation. Children, adults, and elders who had spent their entire lives in bondage. They lived in cramped cabins with thin walls and dirt floors. Families were packed together. Privacy did not exist. The cabins formed 2 rows with a narrow dirt path between them. In the evenings, when work finally ended, people gathered there quietly. They shared food, whispered stories, and tried to remember they were human. Among them were 4 individuals whose lives would soon collide with terror. Jacob, Esther, Thomas, and Samuel. Jacob was in his early 30s, though hard labor made him look older. He had been born in Virginia, where his mother worked as a cook and his father was a blacksmith. As a child, Jacob had learned to read and write. He had also learned how to work with his hands. When the planter died, Jacob's family was torn apart and sold. He never saw his parents again. Later, he was owned by a man who bred hunting dogs. Jacob was assigned to the kennels. There, something changed him. He learned dogs were not monsters. They were shaped by how they were treated. He learned patience, routine, and kindness created loyalty. Violence only created fear. For years, Jacob cared for those animals. Then he was sold again and brought to Georgia. At Hargrove Plantation, Jacob worked as a carpenter. But he never forgot the dogs. Esther had lived her entire life on that land. She had buried children. She had watched loved ones sold away. Loss had carved deep lines into her face and soul. She worked in the fields, but she was also a healer. She knew plants and roots. She treated fevers and wounds when no one else would. People trusted her. She also carried memories, names, stories, songs. She remembered those the plantation tried to erase. Thomas and Samuel were brothers. Strong and young. Their mother had died years earlier after being denied proper care. That wound never healed. Thomas was quiet and respected. He once refused to whip another enslaved person and paid for it with scars across his back. Samuel was different. He spoke more. He laughed more. But inside him burned a deep anger and a dream of freedom. By the summer of 1847, the heat was unbearable. The work was endless. Thorne pushed harder. Rations were cut. Punishments increased. Something was building. Something dark. And soon, Thorne would make a decision that would echo through history. This was only the beginning. The night Garrett Thorne believed he was about to witness a brutal execution, he instead watched something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. The dogs should have attacked. They were hungry. They were beaten. They were trained for blood. Yet inside those kennels, something ancient and terrifyingly human was unfolding. Before we go further, remember to subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. And tell us in the comments where you are listening from. Now let us return to that August night when fear, betrayal, and instinct collided. In the weeks leading up to that moment, life on the Hargrove plantation had grown unbearable. Garrett Thorne drove the workers harder than ever before. Workdays stretched deep into twilight, and food rations were cut as punishment for even imagined laziness. Hunger hollowed faces. Exhaustion bent backs. Thorne took pleasure in singling people out. He humiliated them in front of others, using pain as entertainment and control. The tension was thick and constant, like a storm waiting to break. The enslaved community learned to speak without words. A glance could carry a warning. A song could hide a message. Even silence had meaning. It was during this time that quiet talk of escape began. Not reckless talk, not loud plans, just careful whispers shared after dark when the plantation slept. Escape was always a dream. A fragile hope that kept people alive. But planning it was deadly dangerous. The plantation sat in isolation, surrounded by forests and swamps. Slave patrols roamed the roads. Failure meant whippings, chains, sail to the deep south, or death. For Jacob, Esther, Thomas, and Samuel, the dream of freedom became something more. It became necessary. They began meeting late at night in a small clearing beyond the cabins. There, hidden by trees and darkness, they planned. Jacob shared what he knew. He understood the land. He knew how to read stars, find water, and move quietly through woods. He believed escape required patience and perfect timing. Esther brought caution and wisdom. She knew the habits of overseers and patrols. She understood when danger slept and when it watched. She warned them of mistakes that could cost lives. Thomas and Samuel brought strength and resolve. They were willing to take risks others could not. Samuel pushed for action. Talking forever felt like another kind of prison. But Garrett Thorne noticed the change. He always did. He saw conversations end when he approached. He sensed urgency in movement. And he had informants. One of them was Peter. A man broken by years of cruelty. Survival had taught him hard lessons. When Thorne questioned him, Peter tried to protect his people by staying vague. But fear won. Hunger won. He told Thorne about the meetings. About 4 names. Thorne listened in silence. Then he smiled. For days he watched them. He waited. And on the evening of August 14th, he struck. Torches flared. Doors were kicked open. People were dragged into the dirt. Jacob, Esther, Thomas, and Samuel were bound and accused without trial. The plantation watched in terrified silence as they were marched away. The kennels sat at the edge of the property where civilization faded into wilderness. Inside were 6 dogs, bloodhounds and curs bred for tracking and violence. Starved, beaten, treated as weapons. Thorne ordered the gates opened. The 4 were shoved inside. Ropes were cut. The gates slammed shut. The dogs rose from the shadows. Breathing slowed. Hearts thundered. Then something went wrong. The dogs did not attack. They circled slowly, sniffing, watching. Jacob stood still. He locked eyes with a scarred brindled hound. He remembered everything he had learned years before. Calm mattered. Fear excited violence. The dog approached, sniffed, stepped back, confused. Jacob slowly extended his hand. The dog touched it with its nose. Then its tail moved, just once. Esther faced another dog. Terror clawed at her chest. But she stayed still. She saw its ribs, its suffering, and she whispered words of comfort. The dog lay down at her feet. Thorn shifted uneasily. Thomas and Samuel faced the remaining dogs. One growled. Samuel tensed. Then Thomas placed a hand on his brother's shoulder. Calm, steady. The growl faded. Minutes passed. The dogs lay down. Some pressed against the humans for warmth. No blood was spilled. Silence swallowed the clearing. Thorn felt something unfamiliar. Fear. He ordered the gate opened again. The dogs did not move. They remained with the 4 humans. Protective. Loyal. Thorn backed away. His authority had failed him. His weapons had failed him. That night, the plantation changed forever. By morning, the kennels were empty. The 4 were gone. The dogs were gone. Thorn vanished weeks later. Some said he fled. Others said the woods took him. The truth lived only in whispers. And this story was far from over. By midnight, Garrett Thorn realized he had lost control of something far more dangerous than 4 escaping slaves. He had lost control of fear itself. What stood before him should not have been possible. 6 trained killing dogs lay quietly on the dirt. 4 condemned people sat among them untouched. And the night watched in silence. Before we continue, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Now let us step back into that kennel and witness the moment when power began to crumble. The reddish-brown hound circled Thomas and Samuel one last time. Its movements were slow and careful, nothing like the violent animal Thorn expected. Then it lowered itself to the ground beside the others. One by one the remaining dogs followed until all 6 lay down, forming a loose circle around the 4 people. They were not guarding the fence. They were guarding the humans. For a long moment nothing happened. The night seemed to hold its breath. Cicadas droned in the trees. An owl called from deep in the woods. The dogs breathed softly, their chests rising and falling in calm rhythm. Jacob slowly lowered himself to the ground. His back touched the fence. His movements were careful and respectful. The scarred brindled hound watched him closely but did not react. Esther followed. She sat with her legs folded beneath her, the black dog still resting at her feet. Its warmth pressed against her skin. Thomas and Samuel stayed standing for several moments, scanning the kennel, ready to fight if the calm shattered. When nothing changed, they too sat down, backs against the opposite fence, hearts still racing but hope beginning to flicker. Outside the kennel, Garrett Thorn stood frozen. His face twisted between rage and disbelief. He had expected screaming. He had expected blood. He had expected obedience. The dogs were supposed to tear flesh and crush bone. They were trained for it. Beaten into it. Starved into it. Yet they refused. Thorn shouted commands. His voice cracked through the night. The dogs did not respond. They lay still, eyes half closed, bodies loose and relaxed. He grabbed a stick and slammed it against the fence. The sound echoed across the property. The dogs lifted their heads briefly and then rested them back on the dirt. Thorn raised his pistol and fired into the air. The crack split the silence. A few dogs flinched. None moved. The men behind him exchanged nervous looks. Dalton whispered that maybe the dogs were sick. Harris crossed himself and muttered about curses and spells. The hired hands said nothing at all. Their fear spoke for them. This was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. Thorn paced back and forth, boots grinding into the dirt. His hands clenched and unclenched as his thoughts spiraled. He considered shooting the 4 himself. Ending it. Restoring order. But something stopped him. Witnesses. Superstition. Or the feeling that this night had already crossed into forbidden territory. It felt as if the world itself had turned against him. The longer the night stretched on, the stranger it became. The dogs did not grow restless. They did not show hunger or anger. Instead, they shifted positions so their bodies formed a barrier between the 4 people and the fence. They were protecting them. At one point the brindled hound stood and walked toward Jacob. Thorn tensed, expecting blood. Instead, the dog sniffed Jacob's face and licked his hand. Jacob hesitated, then slowly reached out and scratched behind the dog's ears. The hound leaned into the touch. Its eyes closed. Esther watched in awe. Her fear softened into something else. Wonder. She remembered stories her mother used to tell her in whispers. Stories of a time before chains. A time when people lived with the land and its creatures, not above them. She wondered if what she was seeing was a crack in the darkness. A reminder that cruelty was learned but compassion was natural. The hours passed. The moon climbed higher. Thorn felt the night pressing in on him. Watching. Judging. Finally, he snapped. He ordered the gates locked. He told the men to extinguish the torches. He warned them to speak of this to no one. Then he turned and walked away. Thorn retreated to his small overseer's house near the main residence. He locked the door behind him. He did not sleep. He sat at his desk, staring out the window toward the kennels. He poured whiskey and drank it fast. Then poured another. His hands trembled. The dogs remained with the four until dawn. And when morning came, nothing on the Hargrove plantation would ever be the same. When the sun rose over Hargrove Plantation, Garrett Thorn knew one thing with terrifying certainty. The night had defeated him. What should have been a lesson in fear had become a nightmare he could not control. And daylight only made it worse. Before we continue, remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the rest of this story. Now let us step into the morning after and see what fear looks like when it wakes up. The dawn came slow and heavy. A pale gray light crept across the fields, revealing dew on the tobacco leaves and a haze hanging low over the ground. The cicadas finally fell silent, replaced by birdsong that felt wrong after the horror of the night before. At the kennels, nothing had changed. The 6 dogs were still there. Calm, silent, lying close to the 4 people they were meant to kill. Jacob sat awake, his back still against the fence. He had not slept. None of them had. But they were alive. Esther whispered a quiet prayer as the first rays of sunlight touched the dirt floor of the pen. Thomas stretched his stiff legs. Samuel stared at the fence, his jaw tight, his mind racing with questions. Outside the kennel, Thorn approached cautiously. He had not brought the other men. He did not trust them now. He carried his pistol, but it felt lighter than it ever had before. The dogs noticed him immediately. Heads lifted, eyes opened, but there was no growling. No aggression, only alert awareness. Thorn cleared his throat and shouted an order. The dogs did not move. He stepped closer. The brindled hound stood and placed itself between Thorn and Jacob. Its body was tense but controlled. A warning. Thorn stopped. For the first time in his life, an animal had denied him. Fear crawled up his spine. He backed away slowly, never turning his back on the kennel. Word spread fast across the plantation. Something had gone wrong. The 4 accused were still alive. The dogs had not obeyed. People whispered as they worked. Eyes darted toward the kennels whenever possible. Samuel Hargrove was expected back within days. Thorn knew he had to act before then. He could not explain this. He could not allow witnesses. That afternoon, he made a decision. When night fell again, Thorn returned to the kennels with a wagon. He brought no torches, only a lantern, only silence. He unlocked the gate. The dogs did not attack him, but they watched closely. He spoke low and fast, his voice shaking with anger and desperation. He ordered Jacob, Esther, Thomas, and Samuel to come out. For a long moment, no one moved. The dogs stayed pressed against them. Jacob met Thorn's eyes. Something passed between them. Understanding. Defiance. Jacob spoke calmly. He said the dogs would not let them be harmed. Thorn snapped. He raised his pistol. The brindled hound lunged forward, not to attack, but to block. Its teeth snapped inches from Thorn's hand. That was enough. Thorn lowered the gun. His authority was gone. Completely. He did the only thing he could think of. He told them to get into the wagon. He said nothing more. The dogs followed. They moved silently through the woods under cover of darkness. Thorn drove without speaking, his eyes darting at every sound. The wagon rolled far beyond the fields, far beyond the last fence, deep into the forest where the plantation had no reach. Finally, he stopped. He cut the horses loose. He pointed into the trees and told them to go. Then he ran. Jacob stood still until Thorn vanished into the darkness. The dogs waited, watching. Esther whispered that this was it. The moment they had prayed for but never truly believed would come. They moved north, quietly, carefully. For weeks after, strange things happened on the plantation. Dogs refused to work. Overseers quit. Crops failed. Thorn disappeared entirely. Some said he fled the state. Others said he wandered into the woods and never came out. Samuel Hargrove returned to find rumors, fear, and missing records. He sealed what he could. He burned what he could not explain. But stories survive fire. Years later, travelers spoke of 4 free people seen moving through Georgia with a pack of dogs at their sides. Protectors, companions, family. They said the dogs never harmed anyone again. And deep in the pine forests, people still whisper about the night when cruelty lost its power. This story is not finished yet. Freedom did not feel like joy at first. It felt like fear with no walls left to hide behind. That was the truth Jacob understood as soon as the wagon disappeared and Garrett Thorn vanished into the trees. The plantation was gone. The chains were gone. But danger still breathed in every shadow. Before we continue, remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next part of this story. Now let us follow what happened after the night that changed everything. They did not celebrate. There was no cheering, no shouting, no running. Freedom demanded silence. Jacob led them deeper into the forest. The dogs moved with them, 6 shapes gliding through the trees as if the woods belonged to them. Every snapped twig felt like a gunshot. Every distant sound made Samuel's muscles tighten. Esther whispered prayers under her breath. Not prayers for miracles, just prayers to survive the next hour. They walked until dawn and then walked more. Jacob guided them along ridgelines and dry creek beds, places that hid footprints. He avoided roads and open ground. He knew how hunters thought. He knew how trackers searched. By midday, they rested beneath thick pine cover. The dogs collapsed beside them, tongues hanging, ribs rising and falling fast. Esther used her knowledge of plants to find water and chewed roots that eased hunger. That first night of freedom was the hardest. There were no cabins, no walls, only sky and forest. Samuel stared upward, unsettled by how wide the world suddenly felt. Thomas stayed awake, listening. Jacob trusted the dogs to alert them if danger came. None came. By the 3rd day, rumors began to move faster than they did. At Hargrove Plantation, Samuel Hargrove returned earlier than expected. He arrived to chaos. Dogs that would not obey. Workers whispering. Records missing. And Garrett Thorn gone. Hargrove demanded answers. He received none that made sense. Overseers contradicted each other. Some refused to speak at all. One man quit on the spot. Within days, riders were sent out. Notices posted. Rewards offered. 4 escaped slaves. Dangerous. Armed. Accompanied by savage dogs. But the truth frightened people more than lies ever could. Slave catchers searched the woods and found nothing. Dogs refused to track the scent. Some handlers swore their animals stopped and whimpered when they reached certain places. Others claimed they heard growling from nowhere at all. Fear spread. Meanwhile, the group moved north. Slowly, carefully, they crossed rivers at night. They slept in caves and hollow trees. The dogs hunted small game and shared it freely, laying food at their feet like offerings. Something had changed between them. Jacob no longer saw tools. He saw survivors. Beings shaped by cruelty who had chosen something else. Esther spoke to the dogs softly as she walked. She sang old songs. The dogs listened. One stayed pressed to her side always, as if guarding a sacred flame. Samuel changed too. The anger that once burned uncontrollably began to cool. Purpose replaced it. He laughed quietly one night and startled himself with the sound. Thomas remained watchful. Freedom did not erase scars. It gave them new meaning. Weeks passed. They reached places where the forest thinned and the world felt different. Quieter. Safer. In some towns, people looked away. In others, someone left food near the road and said nothing. There were whispers of a group moving through the countryside. 4 people and 6 dogs. Never stealing, never harming, always disappearing before dawn. Stories grew teeth. Some said the dogs were spirits. Others said they were cursed. One preacher claimed they were angels sent to punish cruelty. Slave catchers stopped volunteering. Back at Hargrove Plantation, nothing recovered. Crops failed unexpectedly. Dogs refused commands. Accidents multiplied. Hargrove sealed records and forbade mention of the kennels. Garrett Thorne was never seen again. Years later, travelers recorded strange encounters in journals. A woman healing the sick at forest camps. 2 brothers guiding runaways north. A quiet man who spoke to animals like equals. And always the dogs. Protective, silent, watching. They never attacked unless threatened. And even then, witnesses said the dogs only drove danger away. Never killed. By the time the Civil War loomed, the story had become legend. Parents warned cruel children with it. Enslaved people whispered it as hope. The night the dogs refused. The night power broke. But legends are only shadows of truth. And the truth of what those 4 carried forward was not revenge. It was memory. And memory, once freed, cannot be chained again. Part 6 is coming next. Long after the forest swallowed their footsteps, the night at Hargrove Plantation refused to die. It lived on in fear. It lived on in silence. And it lived on in the minds of those who had seen power fail. This was the part of the story no one wanted to tell out loud. Before we continue, remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss what comes next. Now let us return to the world they left behind and the consequences that followed. Samuel Hargrove tried to restore order. That was his nature. Control meant profit. Silence meant survival. He dismissed overseers who spoke too freely and rewarded those who kept their mouths shut. He sealed records. He burned letters. He erased names. But something on the plantation had shifted. The enslaved people worked, but their eyes were different now. They carried a quiet knowledge. Something impossible had happened and everyone knew it. Fear no longer belonged only to them. Dogs on nearby plantations began acting strangely. Handlers complained that animals refused to track certain scents. Some dogs stopped responding to whips entirely. Others broke chains and vanished into the woods. Whispers spread across counties. Some said the spirits of the hunted now walked beside the hunted. Others claimed God himself had turned animals against cruelty. Slave patrols reported strange encounters. Men spoke of glowing eyes in the woods. Of dogs standing silently on ridges, watching. Of feeling suddenly surrounded without seeing a single body. No one laughed at these stories. Jacob and the others stayed ahead of the rumors. They learned to move like smoke. They helped when they could. They vanished when danger came close. Esther became something close to a legend. She treated sick children. She delivered babies in hidden camps. Mothers said her voice carried calm like medicine. Thomas and Samuel guided people north in small groups. They taught silence, patience, trust. They never rushed. Lives depended on it. Jacob listened. To the land. To the dogs. To the people who followed them. He understood now that freedom was not just escape. It was responsibility. The dogs aged, but they did not weaken. They seemed bound by something deeper than training. They chose who to protect. They chose when to disappear. Years passed. Then the country began to tear itself apart. As talk of war filled newspapers and town halls, fear shifted into something sharper. Slave catchers became more violent. Plantation owners became desperate. Control began to slip everywhere. In this chaos, stories of the dogs grew stronger. Some Union soldiers later claimed they saw them guiding escaped people through battle-torn forests. Confederate patrols reported camps abandoned moments before capture. Always just out of reach. Garrett Thorne became a ghost in more ways than one. Some said he fled west. Others claimed he drank himself into madness. One rumor said he returned to the woods looking for the dogs and never came back. No body was ever found. After the war, when chains finally broke by law, many expected the story to fade. It did not. Freedom brought new dangers. Violence did not end. Hate did not disappear. But the legend changed. It became a warning. Cruelty has limits. Power can fail. Old men told the story to children by firelight. Women whispered it during long walks home. Dogs were treated differently in certain communities. With respect, with care. In county archives decades later, fragments surfaced. A journal entry, a half-burned letter, a faded court note about missing property that was never recovered. 4 names appeared again and again. Jacob, Esther, Thomas, Samuel. No last names. No dates of death. Just movement. Just survival. In the early 20th century, a folklorist traveling through Georgia recorded an interview with an elderly man who claimed his grandmother had met them. He said she told him the dogs never barked unless danger was real. He said they listened better than most people. The folklorist wrote that some truths refused to stay buried because they were never meant to be forgotten. This was not a story about dogs alone. It was a story about choice. About what happens when even the most broken beings refuse to obey cruelty. The plantation is gone now. Fields reclaimed by forest. Kennels reduced to rotting wood. But people still say the woods feel different there. Quiet, watching, and if you walk at night and hear paws moving softly beside you, they say it means you are not alone. Part 7 is coming next. Years passed, but the fear never truly left the land. It only learned how to hide. What happened at Hargrove Plantation did not end with escape or even with freedom. It left a wound in the soil itself. And like all buried wounds, it eventually surfaced. Before we continue, remember to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the final chapters of this story. Now let us return to Georgia and uncover what people began to notice long after the dogs and the 4 souls disappeared. By the early 1860s, the plantation no longer looked the same. The fields still stretched wide, but fewer hands worked them. Overseers came and left quickly. No one wanted the job for long. At night, strange things happened. Horses refused to enter certain paths. Dogs on nearby farms howled and pulled at their chains, staring into the woods as if something stood just beyond sight. Travelers avoided the old road that passed near the kennels, even though the buildings were falling apart. People said the air felt heavy there. Not hot, not cold, heavy. Samuel Hargrove tried to dismiss the rumors. He blamed nerves, war talk, superstition, but he too avoided the kennels now. He ordered them dismantled. The men sent to tear them down returned pale and shaking. They claimed they heard breathing when no one was there. One swore a large brindled dog stood watching from the trees. When he blinked, it was gone. After that, no one went back. When the Civil War finally reached Georgia, chaos spread fast. Enslaved people fled whenever Union troops came close. Patrols weakened. Control collapsed in places that once felt unbreakable. In this confusion, sightings increased. Soldiers spoke of dogs guiding groups of escaping people through swamps at night. They said the animals never barked, never panicked. They moved with purpose. One wounded Union soldier wrote in his diary that he was saved by a woman who appeared from the trees with dogs at her side. She bandaged his leg and told him to keep moving north. When he looked back, she was gone. The name Esther appeared again and again. Thomas and Samuel were rumored to be working with conductors on the Underground Railroad. They moved people through back routes few dared to use. They trusted the dogs more than maps. Jacob remained harder to track. Some said he taught others how to survive in the wild. Some believed he had become something else entirely. A man who belonged more to the forest than to any nation. The dogs aged, but none were ever found dead. That alone frightened people. After the war, freedom came in law but not always in safety. Many plantations shut down, others transformed. Hargrove Plantation slowly fell apart. Without forced labor, it could not survive. The land was sold, then abandoned. But the story refused to fade. Children growing up near the forest were warned not to wander too far at night. Parents said the dogs would watch them. Not to harm, to judge. Cruel men avoided the woods. Kind people said they felt comfort walking there. In the late 1800s, a preacher attempted to build a church near the old plantation grounds. Construction halted after workers reported hearing growling beneath the floorboards at night. The church was never finished. By the early 20th century, scholars began collecting oral histories. One elderly woman claimed her grandmother had escaped with help from 4 people in a pack of dogs. She said the dogs understood fear better than humans ever could. Another man claimed his father once saw Garrett Thorne in the woods years after the escape. Wild-eyed, dirty, talking to shadows, he disappeared into the trees and was never seen again. No record ever confirmed this. What did appear were fragments, notes, letters, a journal page hidden inside a family Bible. Each mentioned kindness where none should have existed, protection where cruelty ruled. The story stopped being about fear alone. It became about resistance, about what happens when even the tools of violence refuse to obey. Today, the forest has reclaimed most of the land. Pines grow where tobacco once did. The cabins are gone, the kennels are dust, but people still say the woods remember. Hikers sometimes report feeling watched but not threatened. Dogs traveling with them will suddenly stop and refuse to go farther, tails low, ears alert. No one pushes past that point. Because the story teaches one thing above all else. Cruelty can command bodies, but it cannot command souls. And sometimes, the most terrifying horror for those in power is when obedience disappears. Part 8 is coming next. Some stories do not end. They wait. Long after the war was over and the chains were broken by law, the land around the old Hargrove plantation continued to whisper. People said freedom had come, but peace had not. Something unfinished still moved through the pines. This part of the story lives in the shadows between history and memory. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss the final chapters. Now let us step into the years when the legend began to shape the future. By the late 1800s, the plantation was no longer a place of work. The fields were overgrown, the main house sagged and cracked. Nature reclaimed what cruelty once controlled. Yet people avoided the land. Travelers changed routes. Hunters refused to set traps there. Even birds seemed quieter near the old kennel grounds. Locals said the forest listened. Former enslaved families who settled nearby told their children stories not as warnings but as lessons. They spoke of 4 people who chose courage over survival alone. They spoke of dogs who learned mercy when humans did not. In small churches and homes, the story became a source of strength. It reminded people that even systems built on terror could break. Meanwhile, in distant towns, strange reports continued. Railroad workers claimed dogs followed their tracks at night without making a sound. A traveling doctor wrote about a woman who healed the sick in secret camps and vanished before sunrise. Esther was said to have lived longer than anyone expected. Some claimed she never aged at all. Others believed she passed her knowledge on to younger women before disappearing into the forest one final time. Thomas and Samuel were rumored to have helped dozens of families settle in safer places. They taught farming. They taught self-defense. They taught people to listen before acting. Jacob remained the quiet center of every story. Those who claimed to meet him said he spoke little but observed everything. He trusted the dogs more than words. As years turned into decades, the dogs became symbols rather than animals. They represented protection, justice, balance. Cruel men feared them. Kind people welcomed them. In the early 1900s, a group of investors attempted to purchase the old land. They planned to cut timber and build mills. Work began quickly. Trees fell. Machines roared. Then the accidents started. Equipment failed without reason. Workers claimed they heard growling under the engines. One man swore a dog stood in front of his machine, forcing him to stop just seconds before a fatal collapse. The project was abandoned within months. Newspapers called it bad luck. Locals called it warning. Around the same time, a young historian uncovered sealed county records. Most were damaged, some intentionally burned, but one document mentioned 4 escaped individuals and 6 missing dogs. No recovery ever recorded. The historian searched for more and found letters written decades later describing the same thing. Calm dogs. Silent movement. Protection without violence. He wrote in his notes that the story challenged everything people believed about control and obedience. During the Great Depression, families traveling on foot reported being guided through forests by unseen companions. Dogs appeared at the edge of firelight and vanished by morning. People survived who should not have. By the mid-20th century, the legend faded from public discussion but remained alive in families. It became something passed down quietly. Something personal. Then one night, a wildfire threatened nearby towns. Winds shifted unpredictably. Evacuation routes became blocked. Panic spread. Multiple witnesses later claimed dogs appeared along forest paths, leading people toward safety. No one could explain it. No animals were found afterward. The fire stopped just short of the old plantation land. Officials called it coincidence. Those who knew the story did not. As modern roads replaced dirt paths and cities grew, the land remained untouched. Protected without being named. Even today, hikers report strange feelings near the area. A sense of being watched but not threatened. Dogs traveling with them become calm and alert at the same time. Some stop and sit. Some refuse to go farther. People listen, because the story of Hargrove Plantation is no longer just about horror. It is about transformation. About how violence fails when compassion stands firm. About how even the most broken beings can choose differently. History remembers battles and laws. The land remembers choices. And the forest around the old plantation still waits. Part 9 is coming next. Some legends do not fade with time. They grow quieter. And that is when they become most dangerous. This part of the story takes us to the moment when the past begins to rise again, not as memory but as consequence. Long after the land was left alone, long after the witnesses were gone, the world began to circle back to the old plantation. History has a way of doing that. It does not forgive, it waits. In the early 21st century, interest in forgotten places surged. Bloggers, urban explorers, content creators searching for abandoned history. The old Hargrove land appeared online as a mystery location. Grainy photos, stories without names, warnings dismissed as superstition. People wanted proof. A small group arrived one autumn evening. 4 of them. They carried cameras and flashlights. They joked as they crossed the boundary where the road ended and the forest thickened. None of them knew the number mattered. The air changed as soon as they stepped inside. The sounds of insects faded. Their voices sounded wrong to their own ears. The ground felt softer than it should have, like soil holding too much memory. They found the ruins of the main house first. Broken stone, vines climbing walls that once watched suffering. One of them laughed nervously and said it felt like eyes were on them. That was when the dogs appeared. Not all at once, one at a time, silent, large shapes stepping between trees. No growls, no bared teeth, just watching. The group froze. Cameras rolled. Someone whispered that they were beautiful. Another said they felt wrong. The dogs formed a loose circle, leaving an open path toward the center of the property. Toward the old kennels. Something in the group understood. This was not a threat. It was an invitation. They followed. The kennel ruins still stood, half collapsed, moss growing where iron once held suffering. The dogs lay down around them just like before. Calm, alert, waiting. One explorer said they felt an urge to sit. Another said their legs would not move. Then the voices came. Not loud, not screaming. Stories whispered into the mind. Images of firelight, chains, hands gripping dirt, dogs choosing stillness over violence. Each person saw something different, but all felt the same truth. The land remembered everything. One of the group began to cry. She said she felt shame for things she had never done. Another said he felt watched by people who were not angry but disappointed. The dogs did not move. Hours passed without anyone realizing it. When the group finally stood, the dogs slowly rose and stepped aside, opening the path back out. No one argued. They left without running. When they reached the road, the dogs were gone. The footage they recorded did not work. Files corrupted. Audio missing. Only still images remained. Blurred shapes. Eyes reflecting light. They posted anyway. The internet reacted fast. Skeptics mocked. Others shared similar stories. Old family tales resurfaced. Historians began asking questions. And then something strange happened. People who watched the videos reported dreams. The same dreams. Dogs lying in a circle. A fence that no longer mattered. A feeling of being judged and protected at the same time. Descendants of enslaved families felt something else. A sense of closure. A quiet pride. Those connected to cruelty felt restless. Uncomfortable. Exposed. The land was doing what courts never could. Local officials attempted to fence the area. The fence fell. Cameras failed. Signs disappeared. No vandalism, no tracks, just absence. Animals avoided the place unless they were dogs. Dogs stopped and sat. Owners could not explain why. One night, a storm unlike any other swept through. Thunder without rain, wind without warning. Trees bent but did not break near the plantation. In the morning, the ruins of the kennels were gone. In their place stood a clearing. Clean, calm. At the center lay 6 stone markers arranged in a circle. No names, no dates, just presence. People still visit the edge of the land. Some leave flowers, some sit quietly, some leave with answers they did not expect. The legend is no longer about fear. It is about accountability. The dogs were never monsters. They were witnesses, and witnesses do not forget. One chapter remains. The final truth waits in part 10. Some stories demand to be finished. Not with a whisper, but with a roar. Tonight, we reach the final chapter of the story that haunted Hargrove Plantation for nearly 2 centuries. What really happened to Jacob, Esther, Thomas, and Samuel? What force kept the dogs from attacking? And why did this moment echo beyond time, changing lives and shaking the foundations of belief? Before we dive in, if you have not yet subscribed, hit that button now. Share this story with someone who loves history, mystery, or the truth hidden beneath the surface. Drop a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Now, let's uncover the truth that was buried in silence for far too long. After that night in August 1847, Garrett Thorne vanished as mysteriously as the 4 people thrown into the kennels. Official records disappeared, witnesses scattered, and the plantation fell under a shadow that no sunlight could touch. But the story never truly ended. Jacob, Esther, Thomas, and Samuel survived that night not because they escaped, but because something in the dogs recognized them as more than threats. Jacob's years with dogs on the Dalton plantation had created a bond deeper than most could understand. The dogs were not just animals to him. They were partners, guardians. He knew how to speak their language, to calm their instincts. That night, the dogs did not attack because they sensed something in the 4 that mirrored their own suffering. The hunger, the pain, the desire for freedom. Esther's gentle voice, the song she hummed, touched something long buried in the dog's memory. Thomas and Samuel's strength and courage mirrored the loyalty that dogs are known for. In that moment, the dogs chose to protect, not destroy. Thorne's fury was no match for that silent understanding. His power was human, limited by fear and cruelty. The dogs operated on a level he could not control or break. The next morning, the 4 had vanished. Not by fleeing, but by being accepted into a new form of freedom beyond the physical. Local stories spoke of them moving through the woods like ghosts, protected by the pack, disappearing into the wild. Over time, people noticed strange occurrences. Animals behaving differently, fires stopping, travelers guided to safety by unseen forces. The dogs had become guardians of a broken land, witnesses to history's darkest moments, refusing to be tools of cruelty any longer. The legend grew with each telling. A story of resistance, not just of humans, but of nature itself. Today, the land where Hargrove Plantation stood is quiet but alive. The 6 stone markers remain, silent sentinels reminding us of what happened and what must never be forgotten. The story of Jacob, Esther, Thomas, Samuel, and the dogs challenges us to rethink power, compassion, and the ties that bind all living beings. It asks us, what happens when loyalty chooses mercy over violence? When suffering recognizes itself in another and chooses peace instead of war? This is not just a story from the past. It is a message for the present and the future. If you found this story moving, please subscribe for more true history told in unforgettable ways. Share this video with friends and family. Leave a comment below about what part touched you the most or what you think really happened. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of history's most haunting and hopeful tales. Remember, history is not just about what is written down. It is about what lives in the silence, waiting to be heard. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and never forget.